This
Okay.
conference will now be recorded.
Welcome, everybody. We're going to be talking about the long-term care survey process today and about laws and statutes, rules, and regs. First off, let me introduce myself. I'm Susan HAYS. I work for the Oklahoma State Department of Health. I am a clinical health facility surveyor and I work in training. I have been with the health department in this position for the last 3 years as a trainer, but I have been a surveyor for the last 11. Hopefully I can teach you a few things today and at least make you feel a little bit more comfortable with when the surveyors walk in your building, and you'll understand exactly kind of what's going to happen with the survey. So right off the bat, let's take a little walk down memory lane and go back to our high school government class. Let's talk a little bit about laws and statutes, and this is all why surveys happen, and this is why the regulations that you have to follow in order to be in compliance, in order to be able to get your Medicare. So our laws and statutes. A statute is a law enacted by a legislative body expressed in writing. Basically, law is administrative law, and that's the procedure created by the administrative agencies, whether it be the federal, the state, your local. Any of those can create laws, and those involve rules, regulations, applications, licenses, a little bit of everything that goes underneath those laws. A statute is a federal or a state or a local statute that's written law enacted by Congress or the state legislature. Then the rules and the regs, the regulations ensure that a law or regulation is put into effect and details how it's to be put into effect. So regulations are administrative codes issued by the governmental agencies. And although they're not laws, they do have the force of law since they are adopted under authority granted by the statutes. And the rules clarify or interpret a law or policy and how it is to be prescribed, to be conducted, or the action needs to be taken. All of these things can be found in the Federal Register. The Federal Register is the official journal of the federal government. It contains all these agency rules, proposed rules, public notices. Usually before a rule is actually put into effect, it's put out before the public, and then the public can make comments on that, and that's where you can find with your proposed rules and your public notices. It is published daily, so if there's been any changes whatsoever in the last 24 hours, they should be on there. And it also contains the final rules promulgated or basically put forth by the federal agency and published in the Federal Register. And then those are codified in the Code of Federal Regulations, which are updated annually. I have provided you all with a handout that's going to have these links in it so that you'll be able to go straight to those sites for it. Just so I don't forget, there are some links that I put in there that are going to take you directly to the documents that we were talking about. There are hundreds of ways to get there, and you can go through all kinds of different steps to find things, but I kind of tried to make it just as basic and plain as I could and took you straight to the documents. So the CFR is what we call the Code of Federal Regulations, and we're always it's going to be called the CFR. And the codification of the general and permanent rules and regs is sometimes called administrative law, like we were just discussing a minute ago. And it's published in the Federal Register by the executive departments and the agencies of the federal government. So all of these codes are a process of arranging the laws or rules according to a system or a plan. And in this Code of Federal Regulations, there are 50 titles that go from everything from healthcare to agriculture, anything that at all has a law or a regulation, anything that is regulated by the federal government can be found in this Code of Federal Regulations. And it is an annual publication. So when we're looking in the Code of Federal Regulations for long-term care, basically nursing homes, we're going to be looking under Title 42, which is the public health. We're going to be looking under Chapter 4, which is Centers of Medicare and Medicaid Services in the Department of Health and Human Services. Looking under Subchapter G, which is the Standards and Certifications. Part 483, Requirements for States and Long-Term Care Facilities. And Subpart B, which are the requirements for long-term care facilities. All of that's not listed out here, but as you can see, anytime you see 42 CFR 483, you can pretty well be guaranteed that it's going to be talking about the long-term care. So if you look, I just went ahead and put in here, this is an actual tag, an actual regulation that comes out of Appendix P, and this is for tag F565, and this tag talks about the resident's right to organize and participate in resident groups. So if you'll notice right at the very first of that tag, it says 483.10 F5. That's where if you went back to the Code of Federal Regulations, that you would go to that subsection to find all of this information. As you can see, each one of these, some of these have only one area and some of them have many. So we have numbers 1 through 4, and then we have also A and B under 4. So each one of these can actually be split out into 10s and 20 different pieces. Each one of these pieces is actually a part that can be cited whenever a deficiency is written. So all of these things don't have to happen in order for a deficiency to be written, but only one of them has to happen in order to be able to have a citation under that tag. So in F565, if the facility did not allow staff and visitors to attend whenever the residents invited them, then that could be written. And or if the facility didn't demonstrate a response to and a rationale for why the response was that way for the concerns raised in the group, that can be written alone as itself. So each one of these, some of them are really long and some of them are short, but this is how you, when you go to the Appendix P, you can actually read down through here, and it can actually, you can know where to go back in the Code of Federal Regulations to look for it. So CMS, of course, Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, this is who we operate under. We also operate under their state operations manual, which we call the SOM. I'm sure you all probably have a copy of that. I don't know if you call it a SOM per se, but I believe that you were given some sort of a regulation book that talks about all of this. And under Appendix P is the federal regulations for nursing homes receiving Medicare or Medicaid funds. And these are what we call our F tags. That's the federal tag. That F tag is a federal tag. And it also, CMS has also put out the long-term care survey process, and that's the LTCSP. You'll hear the surveyors, if they mention it, they'll call it the LTCSP. And there's the procedure guide, which the surveyors look at and actually work through as they're doing their survey. And there's the pathways, and we'll discuss the pathways in a little bit, in a few minutes. So your consolidated Medicare and Medicaid requirements for participation for long-term care facilities, which once again, here we are, 42 CFR Part 483, Subpart B. They were first published in the Federal Register on 2/2 of 1989. And this all came about from amendments to the Social Security Act, and these these are under titles 18 and 19. The requirements for participation were revised in 2016 to reflect advances in the theory and practice of service delivery and safety in the final rule that became effective on 11/28/16. These regulations had not been updated, and the guidance had not been updated in 25 years. There's been lots of changes in the standards of practice that they brought into the new guidance, and that helps with the surveyors and with you. If you look at the appendix PP, you will see that those changes have come about. So the requirements were to be revised in 3 different phases. The first phase was on 11/28/16. That's basically everybody's ramping up, getting ready. They're making a few changes to some regs, but not very many. Then the second phase came in on 11/28/17. At this time, they put out brand new tags on every single tag. No tag was new, no tag was old. They all came out with new numbers. Some of the tags were split into different tags. Some of the tags were consolidated into one tag. And at this time, they also brought out the long-term care survey process, which is the computerized survey process that the surveyors use on recertifications. The third phase was supposed to go into effect on 11/28/19. However, that phase is still on hold, and that phase basically talks about the trauma-informed care. There's a ethics committee on there, and there's numerous trainings requirements that are going to be required when and if they get that third phase up and running. So for the F tags, which, like I said, are the actual regulations, the first part of the F tag is printed in bold type, and that is the regulation. So when you first come across, when you're looking in double P and you come across that tag, if it's in bold, you know that that's the regulation. It will start off with the F tag and then have the bold regulation there. The second part of that F tag is interpretive guidance, and it includes explanations of the intent of law, definitions, instructions on determining compliance with the law. So I'll just kind of run you through one of these and kind of so you can see what's there. So this is F686. This is out of Appendix Double P. This is F686. This is what the surveyors call the pressure ulcer tag. And as you can tell here, it's giving you information. This is the regulation. It's in bold. And based on a comprehensive assessment of the resident, the facility has to ensure that the resident receives the care to prevent pressure ulcers. And the second, they have to make sure that if they come into the facility with pressure ulcers, that they give them the proper care in order to heal those pressure ulcers. So this is the regulation. The next part of that will be the intent. You'll see some of the tags have intent and some of them don't. The intent of this regulation is that the resident does not develop pressure ulcers or injuries unless clinically unavoidable, and that the facility provides care and services consistent with standards of practice to promote the prevention of pressure injuries, promote the healing, and to prevent development of additional. That was the intent. That's why this regulation was brought forth. You'll find throughout these that there are notes, and these notes are things that CMS wants you to be aware of. This one is just a note that says, some people call these pressure ulcers, some people call them pressure injuries, some people call them pressure sores, decubitus and bed sores, but whatever it is, whenever they talk about a pressure sore or pressure ulcer, that's what it's going to be in the Appendix Double P. And then it doesn't matter what they're called in your facility, they will be coded as according to the MDS definition. And so there's different notes throughout there. Some of them give guidance to the surveyors about, hey, think about this before you decide to cite this tag, or think about, do you need to go to a different area? The definitions are provided to clarify the clinical terms related. So in this one, the pressure ulcer injury, it tells you what a pressure ulcer or injury is. There were probably another 20, 25 definitions, but this is just one that I pulled up so you can see that it actually gives you some definitions on what it's talking about. Then it gives you guidance. And this guidance started off with staging of the pressure ulcers, which is basically an assessment to let us know how bad this pressure ulcer is. And once again, here's a note. Regardless of the staging system or wound, they're responsible for completing the MDS utilizing the guidelines found in the RAA manual. There are 11 pages of guidance with this tag alone. So as you know, you can know that some of these tags are extremely long and are extremely intense on the guidance given to the surveyors and to you, because this is a good tool for you all to be using in your homes. The investigative protocol then comes along, and it tells the surveyors to use the pressure ulcer critical element pathway. And these pathways, we'll kind of discuss them a little bit more later, but it basically leads the surveyor through the investigation. Who are you going to talk to? What do you want to observe? What records do you want to look for? And then we have the key elements of noncompliance. Most of the quality of care tags and the quality of life tags have these key elements. There are others throughout that do too, but this basically is telling the surveyor, in order to cite this deficiency, the investigation needs to show that the facility failed to do one or more of the following things. Did they fail to provide preventive care? Did they fail to provide treatment to an existing pressure ulcer? And did they fail to ensure that a resident did not develop an avoidable pressure ulcer? Once again, here's another note. To cite 686, it is not necessary to prove that a pressure ulcer developed. It can be cited when it's been determined that the provider failed to implement interventions. So if the surveyors come in and they determine that you haven't put together the interventions for this little resident that's basically bedbound, you don't have on a pressure ulcer, a pressure reducing mattress, if you don't have heel protectors on them, if you aren't changing their position as needed, then the tag can also be written for failure to even put out any interventions whatsoever. And then we have the category deficiency categorization. And this will actually kind of give you a little bit of guidance, and it gives the surveyors a little bit of guidance on the different examples of severities. I'll show you the severity grid after a while, but a severity level 4 is immediate jeopardy. And this kind of will give you a couple of examples of what could possibly be immediate jeopardies. Also, we'll go into the level 3s, which are actual harms. It also has level 2s and level 1s. So then we go into the very last thing usually that's here is the potential tags for additional investigation. It's telling us that if we find that we have concerns with pressure ulcers, maybe we need to look at the resident assessment. Were they assessed correctly? The resident comprehensive person-centered care plan. Were they care planned? The quality of life tags. The physician services, was the physician notified of these issues with the skin? Was he making changes as he needed to? Were the nurses reporting? The nursing services, were the nurses reporting? Were the nurses as competent in the care? Administration comes into play here, and so does your QAPI. So they tell us, CMS is telling us, if you've got concerns here, you might think about going back and looking at these other places, because maybe that's where the actual problem lies, not with something else. So skilled nursing facilities, the SNFs, and the nursing facility NIFs must be in compliance with the requirements in 42 CFR Port 483 Subpart B to receive payment under Medicare or Medicaid. And that is why we have surveys. Not only do you have federal regulations that you have to abide by, but there are also state licensure regulations. In order to find these, you can go to the website for OSDH. Then you're going to look for protective health, go to long-term care, go to rules, regs, and statutes, and you're going to find the text of the applicable state laws and rules for the Oklahoma long-term care facilities. And it won't just be for nursing homes, but all of them will be there. I've actually provided you with a link that's going to basically take you right there without having to go through all these steps. These are known as L tags. We have our F tags, which are federal. We have our L tags, which are licensure. Some of these tags also may have an R because they're for residential care. Some may have the assisted living link on them. But there are two different areas that we look at for long-term care facilities, and that is the Nursing and Specialized Facility Rules, Chapter 675, and the Nursing Home Care Act and Long-Term Care Security Act. These all have tags in them, or the Surveyor Edition has tags, but you can find the rules and regs there. So let's talk about our survey process for a few minutes. So all surveyors are required to use the survey protocols and interpretive guidance in the federal regulations in assessing compliance with the federal requirements. So all the surveyors are expected to use the survey protocols and expected to use Appendix P whenever they're looking to see if there's a determination for a citation. The deficiencies are based on violations of the regulations, which are based on observation of the facility's performance and practices. Not only is this the observations, but they're doing interviews and they're doing record reviews. So whenever you see a surveyor standing around in the hall, know she's not just standing there for the fun of it. She's actually probably making observations of something. A Learn Long-Term Care Survey process, the LTCSP, like I said, was initiated on 11/28 of 17. At the moment, this is only being used for recertifications. The system is being redesigned at the moment, which we're all excited about, but it is being redesigned at the moment. And the goal is to eventually get our follow-up visits computerized, the complaint visits computerized. Any type of a visit that we would do, the goal is to get those all on the computer. But at the moment, the only thing that's computer-based is the recertifications. It is a resident-centered and outcome-oriented to gather information about the facility's compliance with participation requirements. So basically what this means is it's resident-centered. We look at the resident, we talk to the resident if they're interviewable. We go through records and see if that resident, if all of their needs are being met. Whether did we observe something not being done? Did they say something's not being done? Or did the records prove something's not being done? And it's also outcome oriented because we're an outcome oriented process compared to a process oriented. So during the process oriented, you start with the process and you work your way through to see if there's any problems. In an outcome oriented, we only worry about it if we find a problem with the care. And so it's the outcome. If we have a negative outcome, then we're going to start with that negative outcome and we're going to work our way back through the process to determine where the deficiency happened, where the breakdown is in the system, exactly what created the negative outcome. There's a sample size that the facility, that the computers put forth and that the surveyors have to use. And it's determined by the facility census. 70% of the survey of sample size is pre-selected by the MDS information. So when you hear the nurses or the surveyors tell you please make sure your MDS information is accurate. This is why, because all that MDS information that your facility is sending to CMS, it's all being run through all these algorithms, and it's spitting out all the information for our surveys. So we need to make sure that everything is as accurate as can be. So 70% is pre-selected by the CMS information, and 30% is surveyor selected. The surveyors, they're going to be selecting residents based on their observations. If they see somebody lying in a bed that's halfway undressed and is hanging out of the bed, that person may go on as a sample. The sample is finalized based on the surveyor's observations, interviews, and limited record reviews. So if a resident tells us that they don't get snacks, then we may be adding that person to the sample. There will only be a maximum sample of 35 residents, no matter what size of facility that you're in, but the majority of it is usually like a 20% sample. The offsite preparation, there's a lot goes into a survey even before they enter your door. The team coordinator reviews the CASPER 3s, which are the Certification and Survey Provider Enhancements reports. They determine if there were any repeat deficiencies in the last 3 years, and these reports tell us that. They also give us, these reports also give us the results of the last standard survey. And so we're looking to see if there's problems that the facility has had in the past that continues to be showing up with all the surveys. We're also going to look at any complaints that the facility has had since the last survey, and if there's any complaints that we're actually bringing into the building with us. Sometimes the surveyors actually have a complaint that they're bringing in with them that will be investigated along with the survey. We're going to be looking at the facility reported incidents, otherwise known as FRIs. These are the reports that you send in on the Form 283 to the State Health Department. And we're basically looking here for allegations of abuse. Every now and then, if we just kind of run across somebody that looks like they've had a whole bunch of falls or some really major injuries because of falls, they may be pulled in too, or we may think about looking at them, but basically we're looking for allegations of abuse. And then they're also going to be looking to see if there's any variances or waivers that your facility has. I believe there's probably a couple of space variances like room sizes or something out there. And I don't believe we have hardly any waivers at the moment other than what's out for the executive orders from the governor because of the COVID emergencies. So after the surveyor coordinator has done all of that prep, then each team member reviews that offsite information, and the information that the computer put out as these are the people we want you to look at. They're going to be looking at those residents. They're going to open up the computer system. They're going to look at those residents and see what indicators and the facility rates are. The indicators, the MDS indicators, is pulled from the MDS, and they are on inside this survey software, and each resident tells us why CMS chose these residents because of those indicators. So one resident may be chosen because they had recurrent UTIs, they have medications, excessive medications, and they have a Foley catheter. They will actually tell us why they were chosen. And the facility rates, the computer system also generates a report that tells us about the different rates of the different things going on in the facility. Each team member will review the information the TC gathered during their offsite prep, and each team member will be assigned to an area of the facility. Basically, they're going to be taking a hall apiece, or if there's only 2 halls, 2 surveyors may be assigned to a hall. But each one will be assigned an area of the facility which will be to be used during their initial pull. So there's 3 parts to the survey process. The survey process starts off with the initial pull process. Once we enter the door, the initial pull process starts. And then we move into the sample selection once the pull's off, and then we move into the investigative process, and we'll discuss those a little bit more here. So upon entrance to the facility, usually the team charge, the team coordinator, will conduct an entrance conference with the administrator. There's things that she needs information on right now. There's things that the surveyors are going to need within the next hour, within the next 4 hours, by the end of the day, and within 48 hours or 24 hours. And these things will all be given to the administrator to pull for us. There will be a brief visit to the kitchen by one of the surveyors, and brief, it probably will only be about a 15-20 minute. They're just going to walk in, make sure that there are no glaring infection control issues going on in the kitchen, and then leave. And then the surveyors are going to go straight to their assigned areas. They want to be able to walk in the door, have a place to put their equipment down, pull their computers, and be out on the floor within just a few minutes. So if you're not going to be around, you might let whoever's going to be in charge know if surveyors enter the building, they need to be put in this room and give them access to that room. It's a little frustrating for the surveyors when we enter a little early, the administrator's not there, maintenance isn't there yet, nobody has keys to the room that we need to be able to get into so that we can get our job started. Information needed upon entrance. We're going to need a matrix for your new admissions. Your MDS person will understand what this is in case you don't. And it's basically a list of all the residents and all of their triggers, the MDS triggers. We'll need your census. We'll need an alphabetical list of the residents. We will like a list of the residents who smoke. We want the number and locations of the medical storage rooms and carts, and information for beneficiary notices. Additional facility provided information. The facility will be asked to provide a facility matrix for all the residents within 4 hours of entry. Like I said, we want, right off the bat, we want an alphabetized list of residents, your census, and then we'll need you to get some other information for us. The initial entry to the facility, each surveyor is assigned to a specific area. Those surveyors are going to begin by observing every resident in that assigned area to identify about 8 residents for their initial pull process. Depends on how many surveyors are there as to how many residents they actually need to come up with. They want 32 on the initial pull is basically what CMS is asking us to do, is to put 32. So if we have 4 surveyors, each should come up with 8 residents. If we have 5, then maybe they only have to come up with 5 or 6 apiece. The surveyors will observe the residents. They're going to interview all of the interviewable residents, and they're going to complete a very, very limited record review for those initial pull residents that they choose. This also is not only the ones they choose, but the ones that the computer process has actually chosen as their initial pull. So your initial pull residents include offsite selected residents. Those are the ones the computer algorithms have pulled. Any new admissions within the last 30 days. Most harm comes to residents in the nursing homes within the first 30 days of admission, because you're still not familiar with them. Possibly assessments have not been completed like they should have been, and we like to know that you're actually on top of what's going on with this resident. That's why we have our within the last 30 days. There's usually a lot of times not even an MDS for us to look at. We will be adding vulnerable residents. These are residents that are very, very dependent on your staff for any of their ADLs. They need to be fed, they need to be turned, they need assistance getting up out of bed, they need assistance being dressed. Most of the time, a lot of them even have dementia. We're going to be including any complaints that we brought in Or if we have any complaints from the residents when we're interviewing with them, then those may also go on. We're going to be including facility reported incidents if we feel like there's some that's necessary, and at least one abuse has to be identified. So at least one abuse will be on this initial pull. And then any other identified concerns, these are the concerns like the little lady that was hanging out of bed halfway unclothed. That's a concern. That's an identified concern. Or if we see that we're going down the hall and we see that we have a feeding tube in a room and the MDS did not tell us this resident had a feeding tube, then that may become an identified concern. The initial pull sample should also include at least one resident who smokes. We want to know, did you do the proper assessments? Are they able to smoke by themselves? We're going to be observing them smoking, whether they're smoking by themselves or whether they're smoking in the group as your activities person takes them out to smoke. We'll be looking at all their care. We would like to have at least one resident receiving dialysis. So if one of the residents in the facility is receiving dialysis, we will put them on the sample. We're going to be looking to see how is their dialysis handled? What is the communication between you and dialysis? One resident on hospice, same thing here. How's your communication between hospice and the facility? At least one resident on a ventilator. We don't have very many of those at all in the state of Oklahoma, so that's usually not an issue for the surveyors. And we want at least one resident on transmission-based precautions. And in the COVID environment that we're in right now, it's not difficult to find a resident on transmission-based precautions. Most of the time, before COVID came along, we were looking at people that had C. diff and people that had MRSA. And those were the transmission-based precautions. Usually you'll see those because there's the little card outside the room. The initial pull process is going to take at least one full day and will probably carry over into day 2. By the time the surveyors observe everybody on the hall, they pick their 8, they interview their 8, they make observations on their 8, and they do their record reviews, it can take a little bit of time. During this time, you probably will not be approached by any of the surveyors wanting to know much information. This is all strictly the data gathering phase to see exactly what we want to look at when we bring these people over into the initials, over into the final sample. So the sample selection then, after the initial pull process is done and everybody's been interviewed, all records have been looked at, all the observations have been made. Not only do we do resident interviews, but if we have residents that are not able to be interviewed, we will ask for contact numbers so that we can actually contact a resident's family member and have an interview with them. We have to do 3 family interviews during each survey. The resident sample size is about 20% of the facility census. That's our final sample. In other words, if you have 60 in your facility, our sample size is going to be about 15. And the system will pick the residents to be reviewed for unnecessary medications. So besides the 15 that we already have, the system's also going to pick 3 residents to be reviewed for unnecessary medications. And this can be any of those psychoactive drugs. This can be insulin. This can be Coumadin. This can be another couple of different drugs. Doesn't just necessarily mean psychoactive drugs. So we have those 15. Now we've picked up another 3. So now we're at 18. Any resident whom we might have identified as being in immediate jeopardy or an actual harm during the initial pull will be included in the sample. If we have identified immediate jeopardy in the initial pull, you will be notified as soon as that immediate jeopardy is verified with the management at OSDH. If there's been any abuse concerns, then we will be including abuse investigation into there too. The system also is going to pick us 3 discharge records. These are what we call discharge records or closed records. We'll be doing one on a death, one on a hospitalization, and one on a community discharge within the last 90 days. Now, if you have not had a death inside your facility in the last 90 days, then that closed record will not even be looked at. If you have not had a community discharge in the last 90 days, that record won't be looked at. So these are within the last 90 days. Then we get into the investigative process. We've all gotten together. The team has all gotten together. The initial pool was over with. They all got together. They chose their final sample. The teams will meet every evening before they leave the building and sometimes in between. And during one of these meetings, they actually chose their final sample. Final sample is chosen. All the surveyors know who their residents are that they're going to be responsible for, and they're going to now go out and do their investigations on the issues that were determined needed to be investigated. So the remainder of the survey is spent conducting those investigations. It's also spent doing some facility tasks and looking at those closed records. So there are mandatory facility tasks that the surveyors have to look at. And those are dining, infection control, the SNF beneficiary protection notification, the resident council meeting, kitchen, med administration, med storage and labeling, sufficient competent nurse staffing, and the QAAQ API. We'll discuss each one of those individually here in a minute, but these are things that the survey system says we have to look at. So each surveyor will be assigned to 1 or 2 of these themselves to complete that along with their investigations of their residents. There are 3 triggered tasks that if something comes up in the initial pool, that these tasks can be triggered. One of them is the environment. If we have a resident complain that it's too hot and they can't breathe because it's too hot, or it's too cold and nobody will turn the heat on for them, we may be triggering the environment task. If we find that handrails are loose, if we find that the carpet is buckling in several places and is a trip hazard, the environment may be triggered. The personal funds is another triggered task. If a resident tells us that they can never get money from their little fund, then this is going to trigger our personal funds. Resident assessments is also triggered if we find that there's a discrepancy in the MDS data and what we actually observe. So for that resident that had the tube feeding that we saw, but it wasn't in the MDS, it's going to trigger the resident assessments, and we'll be looking at that resident assessment to see what this issue was that they don't correlate. So for dining, the surveyors will be conducting an observation of the residents for at least 1 meal. If they find any problems, they may be there for 2 meals, or maybe only a couple of the surveyors will be there for 2 meals because there were issues with their one resident. And this dining observation is going to include infection control, dignity, the home-like environment, dining assistance, assistive devices, positioning, dietary needs, paid feeding assistance, the food and drink quality, food substitutes, therapeutic diets, lighting, ventilation, sound levels, safe and comfortable temperatures, the furnishings, space, and frequency of the meals. All of those things are actually looked at when we're looking at dining, and each one of those areas holds a separate tag. For infection control, the surveyors will observe for breaks in infection control throughout the survey. Even as we're just walking down the hall, if we don't see that CNA applying hand gel whenever she's going between resident rooms, then we may have an issue. We're going to be looking for it whenever we do observe cath changes, when we observe cath care, when we observe dressing changes. Any breaks in infection control that are seen throughout the survey, we're going to be looking for. We're going to review the infection prevention and control plan. We're going to review the antibiotic stewardship, and we're going to review your flu and pneumococcal vaccinations plan. The SNF beneficiary protection notification. Here, the facility will be asked to complete a worksheet for 3 residents that the surveyors are going to select. And basically what we're going to be asking for is, were they provided with the appropriate paperwork, that they're getting ready, that their Medicare benefits are getting ready to expire, and how they handled that, how the facility handled that situation. The kitchen, like I said, we started off with the brief tour. Now we're going to make follow-up visits to the kitchen, and we're going to be looking at everything in these follow-up visits. We're going to be watching a dinner service. We're going to be looking at the refrigerator and the freezers, looking at the storage temperatures, looking at the food prep and service, the dinnerware sanitation. Do the kitchen staff know how to check the dishwasher? Is the equipment all safe and clean? Going to be looking for any sorts of pests that could be there, mice, droppings, dead cockroaches, refrigerator, the menus, and the sufficient qualified staff to run the kitchen and make sure that the residents are able to be fed on time. And each one of those holds a separate tag. So your medication administration, the surveyors are going to observe administration of at least 25 meds. That's not 25 people, that's 25 medications. So if one resident receives 5 meds, then that's going to be 5 of those 25. The surveyors will determine if there was a medication error rate based on those observations. And we're going to be looking at, did they give the correct dose of insulin? Did they take blood pressure before they gave that blood pressure pill because the physician's order said to do that? Did they give the wrong med? Those are all types of medication errors that can be observed. A deficiency will be cited for any medication error rates greater than or equal to 5%. So if it's 5% or above, then there will be a tag written for the medication error rates. The medication storage, the surveyors will observe and review at least half of all of the medication rooms in the medication carts. We're going to be looking to make sure the temperature is appropriate in the medication room, that all of the drugs are stored as they should be stored. We're going to be looking at the refrigerators in there. What's in those refrigerators? Are those temperatures correct? Going to be looking at the med carts. Are all of those drugs stored as they should be? Is the narcotics under lock? We're going to be looking to see how clean those drawers are. If we pull a few cards and we find 25 pills that have popped out of the back of those punch cards, then we may have issues with some medication carts. Then we'll do a group resident council meeting. One member of the survey team will actually be conducting this meeting. That person is going to look at the minutes of the resident council for the last 6 months or so. We want to know, are you as a facility addressing the issues that the residents have? Even if you can't give them what they would like, there should be a response as to why it cannot be done. There will be a group interview conducted with the residents who are active with the resident council, and other residents can be invited. But this group is usually around 8 to 10 people, and the surveyors have a list of questions that they go through with the residents. Sufficient and competent nursing staff. Throughout the survey, the surveyors are going to be considering whether concerns with resident complaints, quality of life, or quality of care are linked to staffing issues. If we see that you've got staff all over the place, and every time we look up, 6 of them are coming in the back door because they've been out smoking, and the residents are complaining that they're not getting baths, and we're proving they're not getting baths, then you haven't maybe you've met the licensure ratio, staffing ratio, but you have not met the needs of the residents because your staff aren't taking care of business. So anytime that the staff aren't taking care of business is an issue, but it's also an issue if you don't have enough staff to take care of the residents. Those licensure staffing ratios are designed as a minimum, and just because you have a minimum and you've met that minimum, CMS says, we don't care what the minimum says. If they're not taking care of the residents and all of their needs, then they have staffing issues. So your QAA, your QAPI, which of course is quality assessment and assurance, and your quality assurance performance improvement, that all usually the team coordinator does start that with the administrator on entrance. Do you have one? And who's on the committee? How often does it meet? But at the end of the survey, the surveyors are going to review the facility's survey history, their MDS indicators, the facility reported incidents, the complaints, and any concerns identified. And they will review the facility's QAPI plan. The surveyors will interview staff about the facility's QAA program. We don't want to see all of your notes for your QAA and your QAPI. We do want to know that you have a plan. The surveyors cannot ask you to see your quality notes, but if they're ever going to write a deficiency and you can prove that you have actually already identified that deficiency and can give them a little bit of information, then that deficiency scope and severity could decrease, or they could actually, in good faith, say, in good faith, you're trying to take care of it, we won't write it this time. And then, so sometimes you might want to give them a piece, but we will be looking at your plans, and we will be interviewing the staff to find out, do you even have a QAA program? Do you know what a QAA program is? And to see if they're even aware that you have one, because those are the people, especially your CNAs, that need to be bringing you issues and can bring you issues to your QAA meetings so that you can have an idea of what's really happening out there on the floor. So during the investigations, the surveyors use the critical element pathways to guide their investigations. Now, these critical elements are the critical components of care that CMS has determined is the critical components of care. The surveyors will make a compliance and severity decision regarding each CE listed for that care area. So basically, we're here at our investigations. They're determining all of this. And when we're looking, these are investigative pathways. If by any chance you've set in on a couple of my other trainings, you may have a couple of these, and so you're kind of familiar with what they are already. But we have, just for an example, there's 41 of these pathways, and there's another couple now that we've actually gotten into COVID. There's the COVID focus survey pathway, but there's some others that have actually come out now. But there's 41 of these pathways to guide the surveyors through their investigation. And so here's one for like the kitchen. There's the dining observation. And then there's the pressure ulcer injury that we were discussing earlier. And basically these tell us, well, this is what you need to do before you even start your investigation. Go look up these different things. It tells you the observations that you should be making. It tells you the interviews you should be conducting, who you should be conducting interviews with. Pressure ulcers, we're probably going to conduct interviews with the CNAs, the nurses, infection control, the DON, probably even with the residents. Any observations to be made, like I said, the interviews and the records that we need to review to determine if there was a deficient practice in these areas or not. So at the very end of all of these pathways, there are the decisions, the critical element decisions are there. And this is kind of what they look like. This is not all of them that go with the pressure ulcer tag, but this is a start. I think there's like 10 or 12 that go with the pressure ulcer tag. But the first critical element is, did the facility ensure that the resident received the care to prevent pressure ulcers? Did the facility ensure that they did not develop a pressure ulcer? Did they ensure that the resident received the necessary treatments to promote the healing of pressure ulcers? And note if it says here, If no to any of these areas, then we are to cite 686. So if our investigation has proven that one of these areas was not done, then we are to cite. The next one is going to talk about the physician. Was the physician included in the participation in the assessment process, the development of the treatment? Was he monitoring it? Was he notified of the changes in the resident staff status related to those? And that F710 tag is the physician tag. And so if we find that the physician was not notified about changes, he wasn't making the changes he probably should have needed to be making, we'll now cite 710 along with the pressure ulcer tag. Then we have the, did the facility use appropriate hand hygiene practices and PPE when providing wound and dressing care? If no, we're supposed to cite F880, which is infection control. So as you can see, just because we're identifying and investigating pressure ulcers, there's also 100 other pieces that play into that pressure ulcer citation that could come into play there also. So you could end up getting 4 or 5 tags because of pressure ulcers, not just the one. So potential citations. After everybody's completed their investigations and they're ready to go, they're almost ready to walk out the door, then the team is going to meet and they are going to look at everybody's facts and the team will make a compliance and a scope and severity determination for all the potential deficiencies. We say potential because these are all potential citations. When the team gets back and it goes through administrative review, or they get back and they're putting it together and they realize that really it's not what they thought it was, then some of those tags can go away. There's also been some times when the team gets back and the management, the administration determines that by the evidence you've proven here, this should have also been cited and a new citation will be written for that. Usually anytime that a new citation is added, the team should be calling the facilities and letting them know, but they usually won't call you if they're dropping a deficiency. They'll usually just let you be surprised whenever the 2567 shows up and it's not there. And so then after all of that determination, then they're going to conduct an exit conference with the facility. So when we talk scope and severity, I'm not sure if you all have seen this, if you've somebody's probably already talked to you about it, but if not, I'll just go through it with you again, just real quick. When we're talking scope and severity, we're talking scopes and severities. And the severity is what is seen in the left-hand column. So, and the severity starts at the bottom as a level 1, which is an actual harm with potential for minimal harm. And the level 2 is no actual harm with potential for more than minimal harm that is not immediate jeopardy. Then the third level is the actual harm that is not immediate. And the fourth level is immediate jeopardy to resident health or safety. So these are the scopes. And then your severities are your A's through K's. So your ABC is a level 1. And the very first one on an A, you don't even have to give us a plan of correction for that. It's just a FYI type situation. Level B's and C's, those do require a POC, but they're almost more like a, hey, by the way, just to bring it to your attention, think about what you're doing here, and take care of business before it gets out of control to one of the higher levels. Then on your second level, your DEFs, if you'll notice the second column is for isolated events. The third column is for patterns, and the column on the right is for widespread. So we're looking at whether these were isolated events. Was it only one resident, only one time, only one staff member, or was it a pattern? Were there more than one resident affected? If there was only one resident affected, how many staff members gave the wrong pill? How many shifts did it go through, which could make it a pattern, or was it widespread? Very seldom, other than for kitchen, do you see a widespread. Most of them are going to be isolated or patterns. So the E's, probably 85% of the tags that are written in the E scope and severity level. The actual harm that is not immediate, once you get into your level 3s, that's where those come into play. And anything on that level 4, whether it be isolated, a pattern, or widespread, is considered immediate jeopardy. If you'll notice the red markings, these are something that just kind of allows the surveyors to know that these are potential substandard quality of care tags. CMS has placed a greater weight with these tags. There's only a certain percentage of the tags, certain areas that actually will be considered substandard quality of care. So if the tag is written at that level with the red in one of those categories, then it's considered substantial quality of care, and there's a whole lot more weight attached to that, and probably more remedies will be applied. So at the exit conference, the survey team will conduct an exit conference with the facility administration and leadership to inform them of the survey team's observations and the preliminary findings. Now, all through probably halfway through the investigative phase, the surveyors have started seeking out somebody to talk to about these problems. They've probably talked to the DON, they could possibly have talked to the administrator, may only have just talked to your staff, but somebody is aware that there has been an issue in these areas where they are looking at preliminary deficiencies. So nothing should ever come as a surprise, hopefully. I'm not going to guarantee it won't, but DON and administrator, you all need to keep in really close communication, because sometimes they only talk to the DON, especially about nursing things, and sometimes they only talk to the administrator about administrative procedures. And so you all really need to keep good communication going so you know what's happening. So whenever we show up in exit conference, there won't be any surprises. These are preliminary findings. Like I said, they will be, once the team goes back, reviews more in depth what they've got, it goes through administrative review. Some may be dropped, some may be not. They will not tell you what tag that they're looking at, and they will not tell you the scope and severity during the exit conference. They will just say, each resident will have been given an identifier. So resident number 3, we had issues with the pressure ulcers. They had infection control problems during the dressing changes. Those are the type of things that you're going to hear in exit conference. An exit conference is not mandatory. So if you have questions about anything, be sure and ask the team. The team also should allow you to present any further evidence that you have at that point in time before they exit, if in case you found something that could possibly help with one of the tags that you've been given. Well, now that you know all about laws and regs and rules and statutes, and you know about the long-term care survey process, let me just emphasize that you need to have a copy of the Appendix P, because it gives you all the guidance that you need that the surveyors see. You need to go ahead and there's a site on the handout that gives you access to all of the pathways that the surveyors use in the survey process. you yourself could actually do a mock survey using those pathways and know what the facilities are going to find, or know what the surveyors are going to find whenever they enter the facility. So those are things that, I mean, the survey process is very transparent. Nobody's trying to hide anything. It's all out there for you to get. You just have to go out and get it. But please get your hands on the Appendix P. Get your hand on all of those pathways. If you have any questions about anything, you can send an email to ltc@health.ok.gov, not only for me regarding this training, but when you are into your facility and you're looking for guidance, send an email to this email, because they can offer you guidance. With COVID going on right now, this email is just being bombarded, because everything changes on a day-to-day basis, and the facilities are wanting to know exactly what they need to do to make sure that the residents are taken care of. So this is a good place to go in case you need anything. I hope that this has been helpful. I hope that now maybe you won't be quite so stressed out whenever the surveyors show up knocking on your door. Besides the computer, whenever they come out to do complaints or follow-ups, they are still using paper. They will not have a whole lot of communication with you, probably for the first 2 or 3 days of the survey, because they're just doing gathered data collection at that point in time. But you will be notified, and you will be, when they start asking questions, you know that they're starting to wrap things up. So just understand that that is part of the process. Nobody's trying to keep secrets from you, but they're in their data gathering process. So what I'd like to say then is, please, please, please wear a mask. Please social distance. And please wash your hands and keep you, your family, and our residents safe. And in the meantime, stay safe. Thank you.